How is everybody doing? I am Oscar Lucio, this is Geeks Between Worlds, and we're going to talk about the things that Nintendo Switch Lite reviews are not telling you. Now, I personally think the Switch Lite is awesome for a lot of reasons, but one thing that stands out to me and something that I did not see when I was watching Nintendo Switch Lite reviews was how great this thing is for vertical play. If you didn't know, there are a handful of games that support vertical play on the Nintendo Switch. On the original Switch, it seemed like a great idea, but the hardware kinda left to poor execution. When you're holding your original Switch like this, it's kind of difficult to keep it in your hands, it's a little bit heavy, and it feels like that Joy-Con on the bottom is gonna break off. The other option for vertical mode was to take off your Joy-Con and try to rest your Switch onto something, and it's just not ideal. That kickstand could not support the Nintendo Switch weight. But with your new Nintendo Switch Lite, vertical mode is easy, it's light, you can fit your fingers around it just like you would a cell phone or an old Game Boy, and it feels right at home. Now I know we have some clean freaks out there, so let me get to one of those important issues for you. Clearly the Switch Lite has a bunch of white buttons on it no matter what color you get. We've come a long way from the Nintendo Wii that had all of the white plastic that eventually turned to yellow. I'm not too worried about that here with the Nintendo Switch Lite, but one thing that I will comment on is how all of these buttons are engraved. When I noticed this, I started to realize that a lot of controllers do not have this, which leads me to worry that since these buttons are white, we may have dirt buildup inside of these engravings on each of the buttons, so that kind of worries me. So if you're someone that wants to keep this as clean as possible, I would say probably just take a Q-tip to these buttons to make sure they don't fill up with gunk. Now the next thing that I'm about to tell you may be the most important factor in the Switch that I can't believe I'm not hearing in all of these reviews. The Switch Lite is much better for intensive gameplay. If you're playing a match of Fortnite and you're in the top 5, things can get intense. For example, with that top 5 Fortnite situation, your heartbeat starts to race, your hands get sweaty, and you end up gripping your Joy-Cons way harder than you ever really needed to. On the older Switch, this is just not a good situation to be in. You're going to wear down the locks on your Joy-Cons, or worse, you're going to break it off. And even the buttons on the original Joy-Cons just feel cheaper than the buttons on the Switch Lite. With this console being one solid piece, those intensive play sessions make you feel like you're not going to break your $300 console, which is really important. Games like Doom and even newer games like Astral Chain where you're fighting bosses, really intense boss fights, or just platformers like Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze. Those play sessions get really intense, and sometimes I just feel like the Nintendo Switch Joy-Cons cannot handle them. Speaking about those buttons, I'm hearing everything about this directional pad, but you know what buttons are getting totally undermined? That's the triggers on the Nintendo Switch Lite. The original Switch has ZL and ZR buttons, and if you look here, I could wiggle the whole button without even pressing it. There's a lot of loose play in the button until I actually finally press it, and even after I press it, there isn't really a whole lot of resistance to bring it back. It's still very loose. Now with the new Switch Lite trigger, there's almost no play with the trigger, and there's enough resistance to snap that trigger right back into position, and I really think the triggers are the best button upgrade of the whole Nintendo Switch Lite. Just a moment ago I talked about playing Astral Chain, and if you didn't know, the primary attack button in that game is ZR, and playing about 15 hours of Astral Chain on my original Switch and now playing another 10 hours on my Switch Lite, it is a huge difference, and it finally made me realize how superior these triggers are to the old triggers on the Switch system. Now here it is. This is the last and what I believe is the most important factor in the Nintendo Switch Lite. I can't believe I'm not hearing this everywhere. I see people talk about the design change, how it's less likely to break, and that is the Nintendo Switch fan that is on top of the console. When I started this video, I was going to talk about how the speakers on the Switch Lite were better than the original Switch. I still kind of think that, but what really is going on is the Switch Lite fan is so silent. This is a big deal for Switch owners because you've probably been sitting there playing Zelda and you hear your Switch hum. The only problem is the fan was a little too loud, especially when compared to the speakers that were beneath it. Not only is that fan silent now, but it really seems like the Switch is louder because of it. If you're like me, one of your critiques about the Nintendo Switch may be that the speakers were just not loud enough. And mostly I experienced that in handheld mode. And a lot of those worries are gone now because you don't have to hear the console humming right in front of your face. So there you have it. I hope you got to learn something from this video. I hope you heard something that you did not hear in other Switch Lite reviews. Now, if you have something that you haven't heard in a Switch Lite review, leave it in the comments. I'd love to know what that is. And everybody, thanks for joining me today. GBW out.